Wences, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me and for that introduction. I don't think I've ever had an introduction like that.
So I'd love for you to share with the audience your passion about what is Bitcoin, what is blockchain, and why is it so important to you?
It's hard to say it in an audience like this because I imagine most of you have quite an understanding of these matters. That's why you're here. I usually, when I express that, I assume a public that is a lot less knowledgeable than you are. But to summarize it, I grew up in Patagonia. My parents are sheep ranchers there. And in my childhood, I saw them lose all their savings 3 times. I think that, I would think that one family is unfortunate if that happens once in their lifetimes. And I can believe I saw it all in one childhood. The first time they lost everything, all their savings, because of Argentina's largest devaluation in its history to this date. Almost 10 years later, 7 years later, they were recovered and they were wiped out again because of a massive hyperinflation. And almost 10 years after that, they were recovered and they lost it all again because the government confiscated all bank deposits. It sounds like a joke or like exaggeration, but I lived it, I saw it. It's real, and my memory of it is not an economic or a financial memory. My memory is a very emotional, almost, intimate memory. I remember my parents fighting about money, and I remember the world around us collapsing a little. Things and people that we could trust or rely on were no longer there. People resort to very animal instincts when the basic function of money is not there anymore, and it's scary. And it breaks very quickly, and it takes a long time to recover, to fix that. Because of that, through a series of lucky accidents, I became a technology entrepreneur, what you would call today a fintech entrepreneur. I really thought that I was lucky to come across the internet very early, and I thought that the internet was going to fix all of the world's injustices, and from my point of view, lack of economic freedom is the biggest injustice, and I thought it was going to fix that. And I did a number of things in fintech for about 20 years, and I was almost throwing in the towel after having done online banks, online payment networks, online mobile wallets. But you look at what has happened in the first 30 years of the internet in terms of how many people have access to safely send, receive, and store money. I'm not talking about sophisticated financial services. You have the fruits of your labor, you work very hard, you pay your taxes on some fruits of your labor, and who can have that digitally stored safely and make sure that it's not going to lose value, make a payment safely when they want, receive a payment safely. It's about 1 billion people who have the same level of checking account, credit, debit cards that we have. The vast majority of people do not have something as simple as a safe way to send, receive, and store value. And to me, it's a shame that after 30 years of the internet really didn't make any dent there. And if you tell me, you look at ATMs, they're the same as they were before. You look at credit cards, debit cards, the number of payments being done with cash and checks in the US. If you tell me that the big innovation of 30 years of the internet is home banking, it's like I say, I rest my case. So I was really feeling like as an industry we haven't made any progress, and I was not going to see any progress in my lifetime, almost throwing in the towel when I came across Bitcoin. First, I was very cynical. I think that knowing a lot about something sometimes is counterproductive. I think I took longer than I should have to understand it because I thought I knew about this. But after 6 months, I became a convert, and I decided to dedicate the rest of my career, most of my capital, and all of my reputation to help it succeed, because I think that a world in which Bitcoin succeeds for billions of people is a better world. It's maybe even more important than the internet succeeding.
I agree. So what do you think about the new proliferation of sovereign coins, and what value can they add?
I see them as separate things. I don't think they compete. I would imagine when we play this whole movie forward, I don't know how long it takes, 10, 20, 30 years, that most people will have a very different road to Bitcoin than most people in this room, right? Most people in this room may own a little bit of Bitcoin, and you got there directly, and I think that will seem, and you're less than 1% of the world, maybe a lot less than 1% of the world population who has Bitcoin today. I think most people will go into something digital first, and then from there they will go on to Bitcoin. And I think that not having digital currencies, in my opinion, digital currencies will not go away, because there's no incentives for national currencies will not go away. There's no incentives for governments not to have a currency. But it makes sense that they become digital. And today, the biggest, it's only a matter of time before they become digital. And today, the biggest bottleneck or hurdle for Bitcoin is that it's really, really hard to turn a dollar into Bitcoin. It's a lot easier to turn dollar into euro, or even into Microsoft stock, right? Bitcoin still continues to be incredibly hard. And that, over time, will become easier, but nothing will make it easier than having digital national currencies, where China coin, digital dollar, digital euros, etc. I think it's only a matter of time. It's unavoidable. It may take longer or shorter, but I don't see a world in which we do not have digital dollars or digital national currencies.
And if we do play that movie forward 10 or 20 years and Bitcoin has succeeded, what does the world look like?
The things that are unique to Bitcoin that cannot be matched ever by any other national currency are three in terms of first principles. One, it's sovereign. It's its own sovereign. Sovereign means that it only obeys its own rules. It used to be that kings and queens were sovereigns. Now it's mostly nation states that are sovereign. And you have a little computer system that is sovereign. And I'm not using that word lightly. So it only obeys its own rules. It's sovereign. Number two, it's uncensorable. And number three, it's undevaluable, undilutable. And those three attributes are unique to Bitcoin. That's not going to be matched by China coin, by Libra, by eventual US dollar. So it has a very unique role to play. If Bitcoin succeeds, it's likely to become a world non-political standard of value and non-political standard of settlement. For non-political standard of length, we have the meter. Well, we are in the US, I should say the feet, but or for weight, we have the kilo. And we have been brainwashed, and nobody would even dream of changing the length of the meter according to political consideration, or change the weight of the kilo subjectively. And imagine what a mess it would be to go back, and are you talking about meters of 1926 or meters of, it's ridiculous. Well, but we will brainwash that it's okay to have that ridiculous subjectivity when it comes to value. And that's not true. It shouldn't be the case. So I imagine a world in which Bitcoin becomes the global non-political standard of value and standard of settlement, where anybody, it's uncensorable, anybody can settle anytime. So I imagine a world in which when you ask for the price of any currency, whether it's the dollar, the euro, the New Zealand dollar, the Turkish lira, you get an answer in satoshis. Right? Mm-hmm. And when we talk about global GDP, we talk in Bitcoin. When we talk about a country's GDP or a country's reserves, we talk in Bitcoin. And that it seems really, really weird to our granddaughters that say, like, how did you guys do it when you didn't have Bitcoin? Well, we did mostly in dollars. And how did you, but the dollar keeps changing. But yeah, and how did you keep track of the dollar? Well, mostly in euros, sometimes in yen, it depends. Like, wow, you guys were weird. Yeah, we didn't have it,
Yeah, I love this stat that, of course, a British pound sterling used to be converted into a pound of sterling silver. And they've printed so many, it takes 174 pounds to buy a pound of sterling silver now. It's been debased so much. So my remarks were all about change and some then and now. Joey's talking about the future. Christian Carlo last night talked about the manic ICO bubble that's come and gone. The one thing that never changes is your Bitcoin passion. Yeah. Why just Bitcoin? And share that with a group that probably is not as passionately focused on Bitcoin.
I am not a Bitcoin fundamentalist, right? Meaning, I'm not a Bitcoin Taliban. And I have a lot of respect for Bitcoin Talibans, and I think I owe a lot to the Bitcoin Talibans. I think Bitcoin wouldn't be here if it weren't for the Bitcoin Talibans. I think Bitcoin Talibans give something to the Bitcoin community that no other community has. So I don't want to talk disrespectfully about these people who want to sort of impose Bitcoin on the world. But that's not me. I am a Bitcoin maximalist, not because I want to impose that on the world, but I feel like I am this guy sailing this small sailboat across the Pacific. I'm looking at the clouds, I'm looking at the wind, the temperature, and I think this is what's going to happen. But to me, it's a description of what I think is most likely to happen. It's not what I want to happen. I think that a world in which Bitcoin succeeds is a much better world. But when I look at what's going on and you say, Wences, what do you think about these other blockchains and cryptocurrencies? It's hard for me. I'm playing with all of them, and it's my job to be flexible if I see something change, to adapt and change my thesis. But given what I see right now, it's hard for me to imagine, for the history of technology, protocols is quite rotund, quite absolute, meaning, any of you has data cables at home or office. You have a data cable that was invented 50 years ago, the Ethernet cable. They're much better cables today, fiber optics, and you are not using them. Neither am I. And if you look at what's inside that cable, the protocol that it's carrying is mostly TCP/IP at the transport level, right? And my point with that is that in technology we have one protocol for each use case. For transport is TCP/IP, for the web is HTTP, for email is SMTP, and these are, in none of those cases they are the best protocol. It would be actually quite easy to come up with better protocols, but once a protocol gets established, it's very hard to change it. People like Bill Gates, as late as 1998, used to think that TCP/IP, what we call the internet today, was going to be used only for low latency, low bandwidth applications like email and the web. But he thought that for high bandwidth applications, like things like Zoom calls and Netflix, he thought we were going to use X25, and he invested super heavily on it back then. And for low latency applications like voice, frame relay. And the world didn't turn out that way, right? It's like we don't have several connections to our homes, our offices for different use cases. We have one connection, and we do everything over that one connection. The incentives for value, when you look at what it costs to secure a blockchain, the incentives to have only one blockchain of value are much bigger than we ever saw, even with TCP/IP. So to me, it seems much more likely that the Bitcoin blockchain will be the only blockchain, on top of which we will develop a lot of interesting things that are being tested in other. So I look at a lot of these other blockchains and cryptos as sandboxes for things that, if they work, they will probably be eventually invented on top of the Bitcoin blockchain, either as a second layer or other type of technology.
And which of those projects do you have most excitement about?
Well, I think right now the most exciting is Lightning. We've been talking about it for years, and now it's up and running, and it's very exciting to see how well it works. It's early, right? It feels like the internet in '92 or earlier, but it's very, very exciting. And then I also pay a lot of attention to some things like what Blockstream is doing with Liquid and a number of other sort of side chains and drive chains, what Rootstock is doing, where you can power a full virtual machine, just like Ethereum, but on top of the Bitcoin blockchain. I think there are a number of very, very interesting developments there.
Great. Bitcoin's about ready to celebrate its 11th birthday next week, and it's had 24/7 uptime that whole period. Are there any other financial applications that have had that robustness, and does that mean Bitcoin has kind of proven itself?
I sometimes think that what we are witnessing is the equivalent of the following. Imagine that NASA was charged with convincing the general public that this rover that they built is unstoppable and indestructible. So they stopped all TV channels to show this stream of these three NASA scientists in their white robes with the drone in front of them, the rover in front of them, and they, for an hour, describe the technical attributes of this thing. It's made of a titanium, strongest we've been able to make on Earth, and it has this little nuclear reactor inside, and blah, 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 blah. They do a great job at explaining it. And after that hour, the general public is polled. How convinced are you that this thing is indestructible and unstoppable? And I think if those guys did the best job possible, maybe they get a 5/10. It's really hard to do that, right? To convince people by listing the attribute, telling them. But imagine that after that, this rover gets launched in a newly found planet, and it it roams around, it has to map the whole planet, and it has 24/7 streaming, and there are channels dedicated to it, our kids watch it on YouTube, etc. And then one day you go to a sports bar, and you're having a beer, and you see that the rover is approaching a cliff, the height of which we don't have on Earth. It's like a 5-mile cliff, and it's going to be the end of it because it's 5 times more gravity than here. And next morning you wake up and you hear from someone that it actually fell, but it's going, nothing happened. Oh, wow, and you forget about it. A year and a half later, your kids are watching it on YouTube and say, look, Papa, it's going to come into a sea of lava bigger than the Pacific, hotter than anything we have here. That's surely the end of it, right? And then a week later, you say, what happened with the sea of lava? It just showed up on the other side. And after enough years of that, you poll the public again and say, how unstoppable and how indestructible is this thing? And you'll get a 10. But that's the only way you get a 10. That's what Bitcoin's doing. So there's no talking that will get us there. It's like people have to say, oh my God, when we have a fork, it's going to be the end of it. The fork is going to be the end of it. And like, oh, fork. Oh, nothing. Oh, another. Oh, nothing. Right? So I think we have to see a lot of that. We have to see an important government ban it. Russia banned it for a little while, and then they lifted it. But for the time they banned it, it became the #1 market for Bitcoin. We have to have a big country where the US, China, something be much more aggressive for us to learn like, wow, it's unstoppable. We have to have a 51% attack for all of us to learn, you know what, it's not the end of the world. Yeah, it may stop for a weekend or maybe even a week after 10 years of working without interruption. I think we can all survive 1 week of no Bitcoin, right? Just to learn that even a 51% attack, which would cost billions at this point, is not the end of the world. My point is, I wouldn't take the last 10 years of uninterrupted work to say the next 10 years won't have any interrupted. Maybe they will be, but I think that that's part of what we are doing here. And the sooner those things happen, the better. But it has its own timing, and part of it is for all of us to learn really how sovereign and how uncensorable the thing really is. I don't think it has sunk in. I don't think it really has sunk in that if Trump wakes up today and he looks at the transaction from yesterday in the blockchain, which is public and everybody can see, and he says, I don't like that transaction, and he calls Putin, and Putin doesn't like it either, and they call Xi, and Xi doesn't like it either, and they call the 100 most powerful people on earth, politicians and business people and whatever. And they all agree that transaction shouldn't be there. Sorry. They cannot change it. Tell me something else that can survive that. That has not sunk in, and it has to, and it will take a while. Even more profoundly, they cannot stop the system from accepting new transactions. Of course, they cannot change. But what I'm saying, I'm Trump, I have the 7th fleet, I have the biggest budget in the freaking planet, and I cannot change the transaction. I cannot. All right? That has not sunk in. No one can. And they cannot stop the system from accepting new transactions. They can put me in jail so I don't broadcast a transaction, but they cannot stop the system. That has not sunk in. What that means has not sunk in. And for it to sink in, it will take time and accidents. I think one day, even kids will understand. Like today, everybody understands the internet. Nobody understands the technicalities of the internet, but you understand that it moves information from anywhere to anywhere in real time and for free. Everybody understands it. We will get to a point where people will understand that Bitcoin is a sovereign, which is uncensorable and undilutable. We're not there yet, right?
Absolutely fantastic. Let's switch to Zappo. Can you tell us a bit about what your vision is for Zappo and what's happening?
We started Zappo as I decided I want to dedicate the rest of my career to help Bitcoin succeed, because I think for billions of people that would mean a much better life. And from my point of and Zappo is my platform to help from where I want to help do that. And Zappo is a mobile wallet that is enabled by Bitcoin, so we can give anyone, anywhere in the world, very, very easy access to receive money, send money, and store money safely. Not only Bitcoin, because I believe that to an average family today it would be a bad idea to tell them to hold most of their savings in Bitcoin. But we use it a lot in the back end to get money in and out of countries where it's complicated to get money in and out, or to do it on weekends, or things that are hard to do with a banking system. We put a lot of emphasis early on security, and because of that, we attracted a lot of large holders of Bitcoin, like yourself and Pete and others, and you guys told your friends, so you made us, by accident, the largest custodian of Bitcoin in the world. Over time, that became a different business, serving you, Pete, myself, people like us are very different than our average customer who just cares about the app, right? Our institutional customers care a lot more about the service and the security. So this year we decided to divest that business. We had more interest than we thought on it. I thought it was going to be a non-monetary transaction, a partnership with someone who wanted to take it over. And we ended up getting paid for it. Coinbase bought it. And we did that so we can double down and focus on this consumer business that I'm very passionate about. Which most of our activity there, it's a global business. We have customers in 220 countries, but most of it is in emerging markets.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think is needed for mainstream adoption of Bitcoin? As you said, 1% of the world uses it. How are we going to get to 10 or 20%?
I keep telling myself that we have to be careful with our impatience, because Bitcoin doesn't have impatience. Bitcoin doesn't have a cap table, it doesn't have capital, it doesn't have a board, it doesn't have a burn rate. So if Bitcoin succeeds, it will be around in 300 or 1,000 years. It's hard to imagine a world in which it either succeeds and it's around in 1,000 years, or it doesn't succeed and it's not around in 30 years. It's hard to imagine an intermediate world. Maybe there is. I struggle imagining what is that world. If this thing is going to be around in 1,000 years, it makes sense that it takes 20, 30, 50 years to get to maturity, at least, right? It's like a tree, and a tree that grows too quickly is not going to be very strong. So my point is that Bitcoin is doing what it has to do, and if the next 10 years are a copy-paste of the last 10 years, that's absolutely fine. I imagine that if you had bet your life on email, it would have been super boring. Imagine you put myself here in 1994 and you say, Wences, you are the world expert on email. Tell us, what? More people using it, and they are using it for more use cases. And now the other day someone said happy birthday. That didn't happen a lot before. And people outside of academia, right? It's super boring, but it worked. And Bitcoin is super boring, but if you copy-paste the last 10 years, it's victory, a very boring victory, but that's what you want. So I like what I see, and I just want to see more of the same boring. Where you see, I don't think we realize that today there's not any town on earth where there isn't someone who owns Bitcoin. Right? And I think we're not too far from a point where Bitcoin will be more the most widely held asset ever in the history of civilization. I can see that happening sometime in the next 3 years, maybe 5 years. And all of those are very important milestones. Some already happened. Like when I joined the board of PayPal, Bitcoin was doing $200 to $300 million on actual exchanges of not trading, moving money through the blockchain a day, and PayPal was doing 800 million a day. Today, PayPal is doing $1 billion a day, and Bitcoin is never doing less than $1.5 billion a day. Right? So all of those are huge little victories that are very sort of boring, silent, but just more of the same, and we're good.
And the last question is the fun one everyone wants to always speculate out. You're famous for saying Bitcoin might hit $1 million per Bitcoin within the next 7 to 10 years. Why?
I think when I say that number, I choose $1 million because people will remember the number. And because I'm safe. Either I am right by a lot, or it fails. But I don't see, meaning I think that it's going to do more than that. I say $1 million because people will remember $1 million, and I think I have plenty of margin, right, in that number. If I think the way that goes wrong is I think there is a non-trivial chance that Bitcoin fails, in which case it's a zero, or there is a bigger chance, even bigger chance than failing is a big chance that it becomes irrelevant, like torrent, right? That it becomes a protocol that is there and it works, but nobody uses it, or it's only used sort of in the corners of the internet. And I could also be wrong with timing. It could be that I am right, but instead of 7 years, it takes 70. Who knows? But if you imagine Bitcoin as the world's global non-political standard of value, global non-political standard of settlement, it means that all central banks hold mostly Bitcoin. not dollars, not gold, right? And that they settle between them in Bitcoin. That all multinational companies hold a little bit of Bitcoin for settling their international trade. Most banks have a lot of Bitcoin in their tier 1 capital all over the world. That there is a Bitcoin-denominated financial market development with Bitcoin-denominated securities, bonds, etc. If for something to fulfill that role, it has to be worth. You're pretty much powering the global economy. All the currencies are there, but they all rely on this non-dilutable sovereign standard of value to settle. So that has to be, in my opinion, more than $40-60 trillion, right? It would be what's required to power that. It's several $1 million per Bitcoin, a couple of $1 million per Bitcoin. There is a much more prosaic way to get there, which is, I've seen this in some companies that I've done, that there are some correlations that happen early on that we can never get rid of, right? And when I first got into Bitcoin, there were about 30,000 people who owned it, and the highest price we've ever seen was $5. And then when we got to 300,000 people ever owned, the highest price we ever seen was $50. And if you run that through, that has played quite well, that correlation. And that also gets you to a very comfortable $1 million. So I say $1 million because I think some people will remember, and then if it works, it should be worth quite a little bit more than that. And I think there are a lot of ways in which we don't get there, though.
Great. Well, Wences, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.